Fallout, the original, was a game that almost failed to see the light of day. Its creator, Tim Cain, had to beg publisher Interplay not to shelve the project in early development in favor of licensed properties that were a less risky investment. Whether it was a sense of sunk cost or Cain's appeal to the publishers, Fallout was allowed to continue development, with the project staff slowly growing over a few years, eventually being released as a landmark CRPG beloved by many, and highly acclaimed for its time. It sold decently well, reportedly massing a few 100,000 sales within a couple years of its release. It was praised for its mechanical depth, rich and interesting world, great atmosphere, excellent writing and visuals, among other qualities, being nominated and winning multiple Role-Playing Game of the Year awards from various gaming journalism outlets. It had a fervent fan base that was interested in more, and so Interplay saw fit to greenlight a sequel. Development of Fallout 2 was conducted in about a year's time, with the game releasing on October 29, 1998. The development was somewhat tumultuous, with Cain, the creator of Fallout, alongside lead artists Leonard Boyarsky and Jason Anderson leaving Interplay partway through production due to worsening working conditions and the founding of their own studio Troika Games. This left production in the hands of new staff under a very short time frame to produce a sequel to a new, lucrative property. This could have been a recipe for disaster, but with a previously established framework and the right talent under new helm of lead designer Fergus Urquhart, lead programmer Jesse Reynolds, and lead artist Gary Plattner, among others, Fallout 2 managed to be a successful sequel to its predecessor, giving a similarly high level of quality throughout, building and adding on to the already rich world of the post-nuclear apocalypse in the process. 158 pages. That's how much information the developers felt was important to give players before they even start the game. Fallout 2's manual is a comprehensive resource for understanding how the game functions at a systems level. With older games, and especially systems-heavy ones that were inspired by tabletop role-playing games, there was a tendency to make highly detailed manuals that accompanied the physical release for a time when looking up information on a particular game was an uncommon practice. For those without internet or without knowledge of forms, manuals like Fallout 2's were necessary materials to properly play the fairly complex and relatively new games that existed at the time. Fallout 2 is very clear in its categorization and expansion of the variety of game mechanics and controls, and acts as its own game tutorial of sorts. Fallout 2, like one before it, goes above and beyond the utilitarian function of its normally supplemental resource, using it as a narrative tool to establish tone and visual identity for the game. The manual is a frayed, semi-charred military-style report that takes the time to explore and bridge the gap between the events of the first game and the beginning of this one. Especially noteworthy is the fact that the narrative preamble is written from the perspective of the protagonist of the first game, the Vault Dweller. This preamble summarizes the events of the previous entry before elaborating on where they go after that elusive ending where they're banished to the wastes. It solidifies a canon version of the first game's main character, even if it clashes with decisions that players of the first game may have made. Certain events are left mildly ambiguous, which is beneficial to maintaining a headcanon for some players, but this has the potential to mildly alienate a player of the first game given that the events may not line up. For instance, a major faction of Fallout 2, the NCR, would not exist if my character's choices from the first game were canon, as the NCR's founders died in my playthrough. Regardless, the manual is both a cool narrative device, a good bit of exclusive narrative, and a brilliant tool for immersing players into the game world whether or not they have played the original entry. Also, their conversion table labels a kilogram as 2,080 grams, and a kilometer as 2,500 meters. So nice job, guys. Hell, they even got the multiplication table wrong. I don't know why they have a conversion table, and I don't know why it's wrong either. Fallout 2's opening is focused more directly on establishing tone than giving players a full understanding of what the world is to begin the game to come. An old-fashioned presentation is displayed on a projector screen to prepare Vault Dwellers for a time when they will want to, or have to, leave the safety of their vaults and emerge into the wasteland of the post-nuclear world. The animation present in this scene begins as cartoonish and almost bubbly, a very soft and gentle preparation for the world beyond. As the scene progresses, it deviates to the vault door, a much older, harsher scene where we wait for a time before the door slowly begins to open. A small family at the doorway waves to a group of heavily armored men facing them as it opens, before being obliterated by heavy artillery. It's an extremely blunt method of depicting the brutality of the world beyond the vaults, and the insularity of the communities within those same vaults in a single moment. The scene establishes the primary plot device's function in the GEC, and gives insight into a potential antagonistic force within the story. Then the series staple War Never Changes monologue occurs, though in this case, it's less interested in telling how or why the world ended up as it did, and is more concerned with summarizing the legend of the Vault Dweller and the establishment of the tribe in which our character in this game will start their journey. The game starts with character creation, and like its predecessor, prioritizes a selection of pre-made characters that players can select or modify. It's a nice way to give a little bit of backstory or an archetype to players without them having to premeditate what they want to be quite so much. Alternatively, if none of the pre-made characters are of interest, which was the case for me, you can start from scratch and go much more in-depth to determine what kind of character you'll play the game with. Characters are governed by statistics of the acronym SPECIAL: strength, perception, endurance, charisma, intelligence, agility, and luck, each of which bears significant impact on various aspects of the game, and some commingle their value with each other. Strength determines health and melee damage, perception affects the chance to hit, see traps, and the like. Endurance is hit points gained on level up and resistance to poisons and radiation. Charisma affects the degree to which people like you by default, and new to Fallout 2, how many companions you can have at any one time. Intelligence determines skill points gained on level ups, and it can affect dialogue options. Agility determines chance to hit, particularly at range, chance to dodge, and so on. Luck determines critical rate, chances of successful gambling, and chances for rare events to occur on the overworld. Most stats also tie into a predisposition towards certain skills the player may have, which have a percentage chance of success that can be raised with skill points every time the player levels up. Skills vary from different weapon proficiencies to scientific understanding or how convincing a player can be in conversation. These skills are tagged at the start, meaning that they'll receive extra points when invested in, raising them faster. Players can choose 2 optional traits in character creation, which provide a positive and negative in each. Sometimes the drawbacks are worth the benefits, sometimes you have the option of making everything harder for everyone, and now in Fallout 2 you can be so hetero that people of your assigned sex hate you. Perks are also a facet of character creation that only apply every few levels, acting similarly to traits with no downsides. There are a great variety of options with perks, but since the amount of them you can choose is very limited, it becomes hard to decide which ones are most worthwhile for a player, especially when considering what playstyle they may have. Generally speaking, the character creation system is versatile, and allows for enough input to feel deep in terms of its systems. If any of this explanation sounds familiar, it should be. The systems are nigh identical to that in the first Fallout. I will, however, commend the developers for incentivizing some investment into charisma as a stat, which was pretty much useless in the first game. The problem of min-maxing characters still remains to an extent in Fallout 2, but is tampered down a little by a heavier incentive for middle-of-the-road starting stats. You can still make a character that barely functions by dropping stats down to 1 if you want, but this will usually harm the quality of a playthrough in the long run, low int notwithstanding. For this particular playthrough, I still emphasize high intelligence and agility for their overall importance for combat and general skill development, but put a significantly stronger focus on making my character function without weapons. Once you finalize the stat sheet or select a pre-made character, you're given your objective by the tribe's elder and can get to playing the actual game. Fallout 2 has a more blatant tutorial than its predecessor. After receiving the synopsis of the inciting incident, you're dropped into a trial chamber to prove yourself capable of saving your tribe and surviving in the wasteland. More accurately, prove yourself capable of clicking the right objects and not falling asleep on the keyboard. The approach to ensuring the player can handle the game in this way is more hands-on than Fallout 1. Not only must you navigate correctly through the environment and learn to fight creatures before you're given free reign over the world, you have to come to grips with the fact that the game can, and does, demand that you utilize various skills and items that you're not guaranteed to be proficient in. Failure is a part of Fallout 2, and although save scumming removes this as a real facet of play for most players, I think it could have made for more convincing and emergent storytelling opportunities where more failsafe contingencies implemented. That being said, Fallout 2 generally does have these, and the tutorial showcases this with a door that can be picked, but with failure to pick can be exploded to bypass. The final challenge of the tutorial is a fistfight with a fellow tribe member, hereby proving that a Strength 1 character is impossible to play. I'm not sure how I feel about gating the rest of the game in this way. The tutorial is by no means offensive. It's effective in teaching and testing the player's baseline competencies so that the rest of the playthrough should go smoothly. But the open-ended approach of the first game, simply dropping you straight into what it really is with no warning, also has its benefits for overall tone and immediacy of engagement on repeat playthroughs. To be honest, I'm fond of both approaches. Character movement in Fallout 2 is, again, just like the first game. Everything is controlled with the mouse. Left-clicking with the red hexagon cursor moves the player the desired distance. There was an issue in Fallout 1 with pathfinding where if the destination you clicked was too far from where the player was, then no movement would occur, which appears to have been remedied for Fallout 2. A welcome quality of life addition. By right-clicking, the cursor type can be changed to a variable context-sensitive cursor that corresponds to an action. Speaking, opening objects, observing things, all done with this. For exploration outside of combat, like I said with the first game, movement and interaction could have been consolidated to a single function as a quality of life improvement, but was disappointingly unchanged between games. I bemoan this, as sequels should generally aim to polish rougher edges of their predecessors. This doesn't always mean simplification is a good thing. Bethesda's development process over the years shows that that direction can have issues. But in terms of control and overall playability, I think this was a pretty obvious change that would have had a minimal but positive impact on overall play experience. There is a third cursor that's only relevant to combat. Clicking on your weapon in the UI on the bottom of the screen, or getting too close to an enemy, brings up a red crosshair that indicates intent to attack. Combat is turn-based, but the turn order is influenced by a pseudo-stat called sequence that only determines who goes first. Every turn, enemies and players have a limited quantity of action points to spend, and just about everything costs action points. Movement is 1 per tile, attacking varies depending on weapon and type of attack, interaction/looting, and opening the inventory also cost AP. Not to mention, any AP you still have if you choose to end a turn early is converted into armor class, which can decrease the likelihood of you being hit to a small degree. It's a careful balancing act of being the right distance from an enemy without moving too much, having enough points to attack, sometimes several times per turn, and managing items if you need to. This is a fun and fairly deep form of turn-based battling and forces at least some tactical decision-making on the part of the player. There are a variety of weapon types and skills that can be used in combat, including small and large guns, energy weapons, melee weapons, throwables, and unarmed, allowing for a variety of distances and visual flares in each fight. Minding that players will usually only have the skill points to invest in 1 or 2 major combat statistics, the variety of weapons in each category still allows for a sense of discovery and experimentation to find better weapon variations. Unlike what came before, Fallout 2 even manages to add a sense of variety to unarmed playthroughs, which felt like an afterthought in the first game. There's a progression system for unarmed attack that unlocks better versions of punches and kicks as the player's stats increase. It feels like the combat skills and weapon varieties have, to an extent, been balanced so that all styles and skills have some viability throughout the game, which is a pleasant addition. It's worth noting that attacks can be targeted against a specific body part of an enemy, damaging and disabling that particular limb in certain instances. This can potentially blind, disarm, slow, or bind the enemy and the player, though this happening to the player is quite rare. Even in the event that players or enemies are injured, the impact is not significant enough to be felt in many cases. Also, players are nearly universally encouraged to target the head to knock out an enemy, removing them from action for a time, or to blind them, both of which tend to do more damage on average than attacking other body parts. The tactical nature of this combat system could have been expanded with more careful consideration of each enemy's unique weaknesses corresponding to a limb or body part, but like the first Fallout, this is not the case. It would be one thing if combat remained stagnant between the first game and its sequel, but Fallout 2 tends to make encounters more cluttered with enemies than the first game, making combat go on for longer than is satisfying in many cases. In any event, Fallout 2's combat is just about as good as the first game, but is disappointing in its lack of elaboration, emphasizing greater quantity over quality. There's much to see in Fallout 2 beyond the combat as well. Most of the game's brightest moments are in the interaction with non-player characters as a method of absorbing the game's writing and overall narrative. Fallout 2 takes the same approach as the first game, but seems to have expanded upon the degree of NPCs that are given important status. The way of telling the difference is whether or not you have the option of saying anything to an NPC, instead of them giving a single line of dialogue above their head. Most NPCs are well characterized in dialogue and provide insight into the world and circumstances of the game's many scenarios in an effective and moderately succinct manner. On rare occasions, there'll be a talking head portrait of certain characters within the game to denote an even higher importance, or at least I think that's what they're supposed to imply. The implementation of portraited NPCs is scattered and seems to be limited by concession of what could be afforded or implemented within the constraints of development rather than by what's truly important. Major story event NPCs sometimes get talking heads, and so too do some companions, but the greater majority of arguably important characters don't have such a luxury. It's baffling in some cases. In mentioning companions, I should clarify that they were a feature of the first Fallout, where certain characters would accompany you in assisting combat, but the feature was given greater importance for 2. Under various conditions, up to 5 people and creatures of the Wasteland will join in your adventures. These characters can vary both in gameplay capability and in the quality of their writing. Some are very well developed, involving whole quest lines, and are very capable, whereas others are given little attention and are borderline useless in battle. The inconsistency in this regard is disappointing, as the initial appeal of a companion might not correlate to long-term quality of their addition. Marcus and Gorus are 2 characters that are the absolute highlight of Fallout 2's companion design. Rich characters with self-contained questlines, and both are good in a fight. Others are interesting but not as useful. Lenny comes to mind as one of my favorite companions conceptually, but he's not at all made for fighting and has little in the way of character outside of his introduction. Some are capable, but not interesting. The variety is appreciated, but the implementation is at times flawed. There's more on offer here, but less overall consistency. The same notion applies to the dialogue you'll have with said NPCs. Quality of the writing is strong enough to remain engaging throughout the game generally, and the player can utilize different dialogue options to alter the reactions of NPCs and the outcome of conversations. Most dialogue trees can still be repeated to either reread the dialogue or go down a different route for conversation. Skill checks are sometimes still incorporated into dialogue, and with speech checks, there's often a dice roll made for the chance of success when using said options, even when those dialogue options won't appear without the prerequisite skill, unless you have one specific perk. On the one hand, I like the idea that there's a chance that someone won't believe you or won't care when you say certain things, but on the other, it feels somewhat pointless to gate the option and then make it possible for it to fail, making the choices even more inaccessible. NPCs also sometimes are able to barter with the player. Resource scarcity can be a consideration in the early game, so managing what you have against what you hope to have can be important as to not overload yourself. This feature is mitigated by companions, as they all have additional carry capacity and you can just give items to them, so by late game you have far more than you need and far more than any trader could possibly trade you for. Still, it's a balancing act of acquiring resources to use or to sell, and rounds out interaction between environment and characters. On top of bartering, talking with the NPCs can also lead the player into quests, wherein the majority of the game's progression and side content takes place. Quests are often multifaceted in how they can be solved, allowing players of different builds to complete the same quests in different ways. The method by which a quest is completed and the choices the player makes therein also can impact how these objectives are resolved, and the game gives the player a good degree of choice from the perspective of narrative. The most frequently utilized method of giving this variety in quest design is in allowing players to backstab the quest giver, siding with an adversarial entity later revealed in the quest. Fallout 1 employed this technique quite often, and the trend repeats for Fallout 2. This is a step above a lot of quest design in both games at the time and even to this day, where it's a single branched objective with design that doesn't account for player freedom. Fallout 2 does, however, employ this method to such a frequent degree in its quest design that the narrative binary of options becomes more apparent than in its prequel. Usually the choices of a quest boil down to either being heroic or comically evil. There is a mercy in this regard in that you can make your own narratives by sidestepping certain content and objectives. For instance, in New Reno, there's a crime family that produces the most addictive drug known to mankind. You can initially get a job from the head of that family to deliver the drug to some workers at a lab where they have slaves as test subjects. Your choices from here are either to accept this as okay and continue working for the mob boss, or kill him when you return. This is a binary. However, the elaboration within the lab itself deviates from that in that the creator of this super drug, Myron, hosts his own questline and is a potential companion, but you can also kill him with the justification that his death will end the production of the drug. This latter claim is not given by any quest objective and is something that players can come to of their own volition. It's a narrative deviation, and technically breaks or ends quest lines, but it's an instance of escaping the complete binary of quest decision making that the game usually implements. Even in the event that the decision is binary or obvious, the quest design in Fallout 2 is still standout in its ability to give the player options and varying outcomes. Interestingly, Fallout 2 attempted to implement a reputation and karma system to track the player's actions across the game. This helps to explain the aforementioned binary and decision making, as each major choice a player makes has to either be considered numerically good or bad. If you do good things generally, your karma will rise, do bad things and karma will fall. But on top of that, the reputation system exists to muddy the waters and make each area a little more personal, in that your observed actions in each town are tracked separately. If you're seen to be a good person in certain communities, you can become liked and idolized, and if you're seen committing atrocities, you'll be condemned for it. It's an interesting idea to track what your character is noted for doing as opposed to what they actually do. In theory, you could steal everything in town, and so long as you aren't seen, you could be considered a hero. Or so the manual claims. In actuality, the mechanics don't universally support this, and certain actions will lead to a reputation loss regardless of viewership. Obviously, leaving behind a trail of bodies is not a popular choice. Unless it's mob bodies. That's fine. Reputation and karma also have an impact on potential companions, meaning that most won't join you if you're a terrible person, a slaver, or a child killer. It's a bold fucking move to let people kill children in a video game. That ice is rice paper thin. Fallout 2 appears to reuse many assets from the first game, but mixes them with a substantial variety and quantity of new character, item, and environmental designs that set it a step above the original game in terms of visual appeal. While some aspects like the user interface are copied from the first game, seeing the improvements to talking heads, new items, and enemy renders, and especially new areas was a treat. The style of the first game is retained with its isometric perspective and pre-rendered sprites derived from clay modeling, and it remains just as charming as the first game. The visuals are appropriately bleak for the setting of a post-nuclear wasteland, and everything has a satisfying degree of grit and dirt on it. Just about everything in the game is visually designed to reflect the decayed state of the world, and that which is clean is notably sterile and oppressive, and intentionally so. Towns receive particular attention for Fallout 2, not only in that there are more of them present, but that each one harbors distinctive visuals and layouts that make them all recognizable at a glance, and that reinforces the character that the towns are meant to portray. Like the first game, there's a degree to which certain environments can feel blocky, but the issue of environmental repetition in places like vaults from the first game seems to be remedied in Fallout 2. No two areas look or feel like copies of each other. Sometimes this can feel a little out of place, like the temple ruin design of the tutorial area, but in this case, I prefer the visual distinction over a complete adherence to environmental homogeneity for the sake of realism or thematic cohesion. Fallout 2's biggest issue in its visuals is that larger environments can be a little sparse in select instances, speaking to a larger overall issue with the design than just the visuals. Audio design in music and sound effects is fitting to the world, and instills a sense of isolation and desolation in this post-nuclear environment. Music is understated, but compositions are solid, and all tracks in the game are good listens. Fallout 2's soundtrack and sound effects do feature some new content, but by majority of reused tracks and effects from the first game. This is at times utilized to good effect, such as instances where you visit towns present from the first game. Visiting the NCR, formerly Bitter Springs, and hearing its track can be a powerful tool for players familiar with the original game, and makes sense to reuse here. Other instances of soundtrack reuse for new areas make less sense to people who played Fallout before Fallout 2, where tracks that were associated with locations from 1 are then reattributed to completely disconnected locations in 2. It's really a nitpick more than a flaw, since the music is always of quality and is appropriate to the environments in which they're played, and people unfamiliar with the first game would never even notice. Sound effects work just as well. Combat effects are satisfyingly punchy, menu effects are distinct but don't demand too much attention. Voice acting is also well done, with good performances across the board. Voiceover is sparse, but again, what is present is a great aid for solidifying an interpretation of the characters portrayed. For overall audio, Fallout 2 doesn't do much, if anything, different from the first game, and is not better or worse off for it. It's great in all the same ways. Fallout 2's writing, despite being largely headed by the same staff as the original, feels like a step in a different direction that leans more into the absurdity and pop cultural aspects present in the first game. I think that the writing is an attempt to be more amusing than in the first, but it begins to fall into alienating audiences that aren't in on the many references and jokes, and the frequency with which they appear in the game can begin to annoy those who don't get it. I don't hate these outright. I like that you can find a holy hand grenade, and that Arthur's Knights are looking for it. I do, however, feel that it at best clashes with the heavier tone of the brutality of post-apocalyptic society, and at worst is a disservice to the more detailed narratives that want to be taken seriously. Thankfully, these bits of referential humor are often on the sidelines, but the irreverent tone is unfortunately not. In some aspects, Fallout 2's writing reveals an inherent simplicity in design that I failed to notice in the first Fallout. Quest design and writing is blatantly binaristic. I still appreciate the choices it offers, as many games past and present still don't provide emergent opportunities in their narratives, but the choices present in most quests come down to a normal or heroic option, and an asshole option. So much so that a core early game event is to free slaves or become a slaver, join new Reno crime families, or destroy them, give power to an organization that wants to ally with the prominent society of the region, or give power to someone who wants to keep the labor force hooked on drugs, help marginalized groups and societies thrive, or literally blow up their nuclear reactor. These are smaller parts of a larger whole, however. I will give the central narrative of Fallout 2 credit, especially for the gradual discovery of the central antagonists, and the ways in which it slowly builds up the world and lore over a playthrough. You get to see both how bad things are, how good they can be, and decide how you want the world to change, all while you pursue the central goal of saving your tribe from eventual desolation. If you want that complete experience, however, your time will often be spent in a direction separate from the inciting incident. The minutiae of dialogue is well written, usually concise, not overly expositional, in spite of having a lot to exposit upon, and important characters usually feel well defined in the way that they're written. Fallout 2 generally shares the strengths of the original in this regard, but in its attempt to be more than the first, has a tendency to be a bit too much at times. The iteration of gameplay for Fallout 2, much like its writing, audio design, and visual design, is also fairly insubstantial. As I alluded to in explaining the game's various systems, it reuses the framework of the first game nearly wholesale. Character building, progression, and stats are pretty much one-to-one with the original, with the addition of new perks being one of the only exceptions to this. Thankfully, the charisma stat was actually made useful in Fallout 2, being needed if you want an army of followers, which you will very much need. Exploration and movement are fundamentally the same as the first game, a missed opportunity to simplify the tedium of the game's movement controls outside of combat. Combat itself features surface-level additions, with new weapon varieties available throughout the game. Notably in my playthrough was the viability of a completely unarmed playthrough thanks to reclassification of unarmed weapon types and moves. Fallout 1 had basically one option for unarmed: punch. Fallout 2 has differing varieties in terms of name, the damage they deal, and critical rate. I'm pleased that unarmed is made more superficially varied, but feel that combat as a whole is relatively untouched from the first game. What is egregious, however, is the approach to encounter design between the two games. The first game had the good sense to keep encounters small, only a few enemies per combat sequence, with one deviation for a particular quest that aided the impact of its storytelling. Fallout 2, indicative of the design of the game as a whole, is just Fallout but with more, regardless of whether or not more is a good idea. In the early game, before you have access to a variety of companions, groups of enemies will outnumber you by a factor of 5 or more on average. When you have companions, things balance out in difficulty but become far worse in tedium. Every enemy acts individually, one at a time. Same goes for companions. As a player, with a full party and encounters that sometimes have 15 or more enemies, you get one turn every several minutes. It becomes extremely boring to watch encounters play out time and again with intermittent interaction from the player, especially when combat encounters are very frequent in the world map and interior environments. The amount of waiting becomes an active deterrent to playing the game, especially when combined with, admittedly my own problem, reloading the game if any companion dies, and dying plenty of times myself. While the variety of environments on display in Fallout 2 are visually diverse and interesting, I find that the game stretches itself a bit too far in a search for quantity at the cost of quality. The world of Fallout 2 is larger than the first game, with more towns, more NPCs, more quests, but the content therein seems to lack the same degree of detail or polish that was present in the first game. It speaks to a clash between the ambition of the developers and the constraints of development, whether they were monetary or timeline-based. This is not to say by any means Fallout 2 is a bad game. The foundation of the original was strong for its time and in many aspects is still exemplary. Rather, I mean that Fallout 2's design was not critical of the flaws in the original, and in their ambition to make a bigger game, exaggerated some of the underlying issues. Fallout 2 was surprising in the ways that it went wrong. Video settings wouldn't stick on restart, which was admittedly a problem with the first game, but to a lesser extent. Resolution options change nothing in windowed mode, and full screen mode completely breaks if you leave the window. Like so bad that it disappears from taskbar and window previews. The game's still running in this state, but it has to be closed from Task Manager to actually restart it. Plus, in full screen it doesn't capture it all. Windowed mode had two main options, a 480p window that wasn't ideal, and a 960p window that barely functioned. Several video backends for the game aren't performant, and the option that I eventually had to settle for lags to high hell at what felt like random. Not to mention, Fallout 2 crashed several times throughout my playthrough. Were I not as diligent about saving as I was, this could have made a shaky experience into an intolerable one. As it stands, Fallout 2's Steam version is technically inadequate from a stability point of view. This surprises me twofold. One, Fallout the prequel was comparatively stable. One crash, somewhat stable video settings and options. It worked for me with minimal fuss. Two, the Steam version comes pre-modded for the sake of stability and compatibility. Just how the game operates in the kind of condition where I have to modify INI files to manually change the video settings and still feels like it's built on a foundation of sticks and superglue is beyond me. The story of Fallout 2 begins with a very brief recap of the events of the first game, and by the events, I mean the canon events of the first game. As stated previously, much of the context for the first game is provided within the manual from the perspective of the Vault Dweller. In their canon adventure, there's an implication that the Vault Dweller may have been more morally ambiguous than many players assume, as they state that doing a good thing sometimes means being a very bad person, and that I feel no remorse for my actions in that place referring to Junktown. One can assume a lot of things from that, but my guess is that it either refers to killing Doc Morbid, or for some ungodly reason allowing the casino underworld boss to assume power over the Mayor Killian, presumably the former. I like that the Vault Dweller, even in old age, fondly remembers Dogmeat in their adventures. Interestingly, the manual makes canon the death of another companion from the first game, Ian from Shady Sands, with his death scarring its way into the Vault Dweller's memory. Unfortunately, the Vault Dweller's good work in Necropolis goes to waste as the city is canonically overrun by mutants, though there are still technically some stragglers from that event. In a strange break from the intended progression of the first game, the Vault Dweller kills the game's central antagonist, the Master, before reaching the FEV vats. You can't do that in the actual game, so it's weird to see it here. Upon the completion of the events from the first game wherein the Vault Dweller is forcibly ejected from their home vault, They wander the nearby wastes for a time, encounter a small group from their vault who also had departed, and over time, a small tribe is formed northward with the vault dweller at the helm. It's in this tribe where the game opens to its inciting incident. Very similarly to Fallout 1's reason for exploring, Fallout 2 quickly establishes a gradual but inevitable peril for the small tribe of Arroyo. Crops and animals are dying, illness is pervasive. Altogether, it's not the best time. The solution is a fairly blatant plot contrivance. The Garden of Eden Creation Kit, or GEC, a device few know about that's a miracle salvation device for a budding society. How it works is not explained. How it exists is not explained outside of knowing it came packaged with certain vaults. I find that as far as reasons to start a story go, this is a weaker premise than the first Fallout. It imitates the pressing need for player action and gives them reason to explore, but the actual solution and goal is significantly less grounded. Rather than finding a replacement part for what basically amounts to a large-scale water purifier, you find a pop-up society box. Maybe it's better this way, given that the circumstances of Fallout are a mix of grounded situations with weight, and wacky out-there plot elements like a super steroid virus with all the same sterilizing effects. I personally prefer the conflicts in Fallout to be taken somewhat more seriously most of the time, but giving players an early impression of the game's more comical side I think is also a useful tool for level setting in terms of tone. Despite being titled the Chosen One by our tribe elder, and just about every other major mention of our player character, we're required to pass a workplace health and safety training course, but instead of instructions on safely operating heavy machinery and the principles of ergonomics, we're testing our ability to kill small creatures, pick locks, blow up doors, and beat the shit out of our family. Arroyo's trial culminates in a fistfight with a fellow tribe member as a test of worthiness. Our sparring partner gives a monologue on the importance of fighting with one's hands, an intimate art that doesn't obscure the harm one inflicts upon others. We'll be taking this to heart, but maybe not in the way he intended. Completing the trial chamber awards us with the very clothes our founder wore upon their back, the Vault 13 jumpsuit. I'm a little disappointed that after this point we can no longer just run around in a shoulder belt and some pants. Alas, the suit is now glued to our skin. We're let out of the chamber back into our dying home. Arroyo is a small community populated by self-sufficient individuals who have mostly adapted to the harsh wilderness of the wasteland, barring the poor conditions they find themselves struck with. We can speak with our elder, who will give us some direction and reiterate our objective, but we can also speak to our village shaman, Hakunen, who will eloquently inform us of a problem of infestation in the local crops. We can and will be punching plants to death. Surprisingly strong for the first area, the spore plants can chomp at you from a tile further than you can punch, and can spit at you, making them a good example of the fact that the game will absolutely pull no punches about killing you. Make sure to save often. The player can also bring back another tribe member's dog, get hand-to-hand training, polearm training, and complain about that one family member that doesn't particularly like you. There's apparently a speech check with them for repairing their son's spear that makes them not completely hate you. And, I can't believe this, if you take a long time after saving the dog from earlier to acquire the Gek, she'll be forced to cook and eat the fucking dog as Arroyo slowly runs out of food. The game itself does retain some time checks from Fallout 1, but unlike the first game, doesn't impose a known time limit. That system is instead replaced with visions of Hakunen telling the player of worsening conditions for Arroyo. It's mostly a relief that the time pressure is by and large off for Fallout 2, and I imagine most players like myself will end up taking painful advantage of this for leveling or waiting to heal. I didn't actually dislike the pressure put on by the first game. It instilled a sense of urgency and consequence for extremely mismanaged time. But given that the sequel is considerably larger and longer than the first game, this change is likely for the best. Departing Arroyo means the player's first exposure to the wasteland, encompassing most of Northern California and some of Nevada, possibly a little Oregon and Idaho if you really want to push it. Two things. One, even in the event of nuclear Armageddon where all natural life is burnt out, the northwestern region of the map isn't a desert. Klamath, a real-life town present in Fallout 2, which is less than 6 miles off the coast, looks like this. Not this. Second, while it's the player's first time exploring the waste, I find it implausible that the Chosen One or other Arroyo tribe members wouldn't be intimately familiar with at least the nearby land and communities of note. The game treats it as though it's the Chosen One's first foray outside of the tribe. Regardless, our journey takes us out into the waste and toward the nearest settlement for information on the Gek. Klamath is our first stop. The first building to the left of the town's entrance houses a family, mother and daughter, who run an inn and will trade for general goods. The mother, Arden, complains about her missing fiancé, whom we can attempt to rescue from a nearby gecko nest, and the daughter, Maida, will make mention of a tribal who the family has enslaved for owing them a debt. I think that the writing here wants you to sympathize with the family, but it's incredibly hard to do so when they're willing to actively enslave someone for a debt of $350. It's even worse when you consider that Maeda appears to harbor a fondness for Sulik, the one they enslaved, intermixed with her overwhelming prejudice. If you have the money, you can offer to free Sulik, but at the moment, we're just shy. Bob here asks if you can repair his still south of town, to which you can either do so, fending off a bunch of geckos, or sell the location out from under him. Getting the coin I needed finally gave me enough to get Sulik the hell away from Maeda. Sulik is our first companion, and will be sticking around the longest. He's a tribal like ourselves, and is adorned with the bones of the fallen, of which he often communes with. Sulik may well be the most dialogue-heavy companion, having different quotes for most areas and situations of the game, but his story arc is never completed. He tells the player upon meeting them that he was enslaved for causing a drunken ruckus in Plymouth out of frustration for not finding leads to his kidnapped sister. His sister is said to be kidnapped by slavers, but once Sulik is a party member, this point will genuinely never come up again, nor is there a resolution to this potential quest. He fights exclusively with close-range weapons, not unlike ourselves. The town of Plymouth also features a bathhouse, a bar, and a west end with a real rat problem. The back end of this section of town is barricaded, and you're only allowed past if you offer to deal with their rat problem and kill the rat god in the nearby caves. There's also a broken down car in this part of town that you can pillage the fuel cell regulator from, which will be useful later. Smiley, Arden's fiancé, is stuck in the toxic caves to the northwest, and after getting painful radiation burns and never dying, Smiley is returned to his loved ones. In the toxic caves is a door and generator that are hiding some very powerful items that we'll never get because it requires a repair skill of over 80 and an electric lockpick, so by the time we have those prerequisites, I'll inevitably have forgotten about it, and so will you. Sulik, in his search for his sister, mentions a trader of importance to us, Vic, who may have info on the Gek we're looking for. We're encouraged to head in the direction of the next town, the Den. This place is one half a whole. The town is divided between complete scumbags and the ones they prey upon. Story that's unfortunately all too common in the wastes. The town itself features some shops, a bar or two, a church used as a warehouse for drugs, a con artist selling ghost stories, a drug house, and the head of the Slavers Guild. Just about everyone wants something here. The owner of Becky's bar needs us to collect a debt from a guy named Fred, who's badly down on his luck. When talking to him, he'll plead with you for more time. You can ask for more money than Rebecca needs from him, which is such a dickish thing to do. But you can also shield the debt from him either partially or totally. I chose to help the man out, and boy would I be rewarded for that choice down the line. The town also has two sub-gangs with Metzger at the top of the town's food chain. Metzger runs the Slavers Guild, and were I capable of caving his skull in, I would, but any attempt to do so at this point would have me bodied by 6 large men, and while that sounds like a good time in theory, in practice, it would just mean death, so I'll have to come back later. In the meantime, a sub-gang run by Lara is attempting to get the edge on another gang run by Tyler. Lara will ask for information on what Tyler's gang is doing in the church, and following that, will ask you to get permission from Metzger to initiate gang war. Because these are very cool and nice tasks that are not a detriment to karma, I helped out for the extra cash. Amazingly, and I wish I knew this when playing, after the violent takeover you participate in over Tyler's gang, Lara's group will stay in allied status, meaning that I could have gotten an early and abundantly out of character for Lara kill of Metzger and his crew for free. That would have been the way to go, 2 problems with 1 solution. The Den also has a graveyard, which among joke and developer names holds the burial site of one Anna Winslow, a ghost of the town who wishes for her necklace to be returned to her. Ghosts are real, I guess. To get it back, I assumed you'd just grab it off her gravesite. I got a little confused and dug up the entire graveyard. There's a perk for that. To actually get the necklace, you have to ask at the town's diner about it to find out that another guy in town stole the thing before running scared shitless of the ghost in the house he took it from. You give him a second spook and he'll give the necklace back. For our trouble, the ghost calcifies. You're supposed to bury her bones, but I failed to put 2 and 2 together, and so was just carrying around some lady's skeleton for a while. You can also chat up a local about the main antagonist from the previous game. Tucked away in a junkyard in the Den is another car, but this time it has an owner and isn't complete scrap. Its owner will yell at you for meddling with it, and I think you can aggro if you do it too many times. He'll tell obedient players about what the vehicle needs in order to run again, a fuel cell controller. Add this to the list of things that I'll inevitably forget about. Leaving the Den with the Slavers Guild intact and leaving our only real lead imprisoned by them, I begin to wander the wastes. More so out of a sense of curiosity and need to level than because I know what I'm doing, because I very much don't. The next settlement I bumbled my way to was Reading on the way to New Reno, the latter of which I'd heard about from the guy who stole that ghost girl's necklace. Reading is nearabouts the most western town you'll find in Fallout 2, Not geographically, but in terms of narrative motifs. A small gold mining town that gets traders every now and again, and one in which you get the chance to play sheriff. The typical Fallout-style pick-a-side quest is in full force here, with 2 mining factions commissioning you to retrieve an excavator chip from the mines below. Additionally, said mines are flooded with extremely dangerous creatures known as Wanamingos, which the mayor and town casino owner asks us to clear out. For this point in the game, trying to do so is a death sentence, but believe me, I tried. The 2 mining companies in question are Cocoweef Mine and Morningstar Mine respectively. Dan McGrew, the owner of Morningstar, is mostly content with the status quo in the town, aiming to garner further support and drugs from New Reno's crime family to build their influence within Reading. Part of the failure of the mining operations in Reading at present are a result of many workers being motivated and subsequently demotivated by jet dependency. On the other hand, Mark LaBarge, Cocoweef's owner, is more interested in establishing better relations with the New California Republic, a growing governmental and military power in the region. I would imagine that taxes and governance are probably a better long-term bet than crime families and addicted miners, so even though I can't get the chip now, I know who I'll be siding with down the line. But the writers don't. The caravan leader in Reading incorrectly describes both parties' allegiances when asked, as if the human manifestation of the door guard that only tells lies. Also, despite being in charge of managing caravan expeditions from Reading, I tried waiting for the dates they'd show up and absolutely nothing happened. After several deaths in and around Reading, I decided to try my luck in Vault City, but instead fell upon a community called Modoc along the way. Modoc's got mysteries and small-time busywork. Joe, the sheriff, asks for our assistance in investigating a farm northeast of town, in which a member of the town used to live but then disappeared. Exploring the farm reveals a floor trap descending into an underground civilization. They're defensive and cautious, but not hostile. I was really intrigued by the idea of a mole-like human society living so close to a whole town while remaining undetected, but overall was disappointed with the lack of things to do within it. Talking to the head of the town, he asks you to see if there can be peace made between the 2 settlements. Our job is to facilitate such a peace treaty, but to do so, not only do we have to talk to Joe again, in one of the only quests that's under a time limit, we have to find the person who used to live at the farm and was assumed dead. This takes us all the way back to the den, where Carl, a terrified man drowning his sorrow in fear and alcohol, needs to be convinced to come back home. We do so, and the town is saved within 1 day of the time limit. After this point, I expected there to be more interactions between the communities, but no. No new quests from the underground settlement, no characters between each town, nothing. The quest ends, you get experience, end of story until the final slideshow. The rest of Modoc is basically comic relief quests. 2 old men, one of whom is very, very senile, have a long-standing broken friendship over a lost watch that one accused the other of stealing. This is so well established that the whole town knows about it and wonders why you're even getting involved. To find out what happened to the watch, you have to blow up an outhouse, but not before smelling the brown roses, as it were. There's a cavern system beneath the town's only real toilet, and to get to the back end where the watch and the bear is locked in, you have to plant a timed explosive and get out of there before it goes off, because when it does, the fumes from years of urine and excrement ignite and blow the place sky high, literally covering the town in shit. Only after this point do you go back down, fight a bear that somehow survived, and get the watch back. The town also has a quest to clear rodents from a garden, and this being the wasteland, the rodents are of course of unusual size. There's also a butcher in town who can enlist your aid in defending their cattle from a pack of wolves. The more Brahmin that die here, the less you get paid. Fair enough, but the wolves come in super fast and in huge packs.
Also the haha son man stick pin you're in the cow so funny.
Moreover, there's an injured Brahmin you can heal too, as one does. Also, the senile old man Cornelius' wife Rose makes omelets from Deathclaw eggs. From a Deathclaw she managed to tame and keep captive in a shed behind her bed and breakfast. If there's anyone to truly fear in the wasteland, it may well be her. Our adventures in Modoc behind us, we waft the smell off ourselves towards Vault City next. Or so I thought. In my infinite distraction, I found my way to the town of Gecko before landing in VC. Gecko was the ghoul town of Fallout 2, like Necropolis was for Fallout 1. And like in that game, quickly shot its way up into my favorite settlements. In Fallout 1 and 2, there's a little bit of semantic confusion between mutants and ghouls, and a particular character in this settlement is the primary motivator as to why. Harold is our man of the hour here. He actually appears in Fallout 1 in the hub, but in this game we begin to see a tree growing from his head. He resembles the typical ghouls of the series, which are humans who instead of being killed by radiation were mutated by it into decayed-looking beings who don't die of age. But Harold is actually a mutant born of the FEV virus. Though instead of becoming the typical buff super mutant we see throughout the series, he was given an exception and shaped into something much closer to the former group. In any event, this town of ghouls, run by a mutant with a tree in his head, is charming. As charming as a post-nuclear settlement can get anyway. It's amazing to me on multiple fronts how people don't praise the ghouls as the unsung heroes of the wasteland. Many of them are survivors of Great War nukes, have been around the longest, are usually the smartest, most capable, and most even-keeled people in the wastes, and they really just don't give a single shit about anything. Harold is an incredibly chill guy, and his assistant Lenny is a doctor that can become a companion. He's next to useless in a fight, but I love the guy, so he'll be sticking around till the end. Gecko's biggest problems have to do with the maintenance of its nuclear power plant, providing energy for the town itself and Vault City to the south. The problem is that the reactor's in a state of relative disrepair, leaking radiation into the nearby groundwater. If you're incompetent or malicious fuckwad, you can blow up the reactor and destroy the lives of many ghouls in the process. But you can also repair the reactor, and that option doesn't bar you entrance from Vault City. Speaking of which, the part we need to repair the reactor is being held by Vault City's amenities office, of which you have to convince the right Vault City staff to let it go. This is an issue for reasons that will be mentioned when we get to Vault City proper. Once acquired, you either delegate the task to someone else, irradiate yourself and install it manually, or undergo a moon logic puzzle to navigate a robot to the installation properly. I cheated by looking it up and did the moon logic puzzle for the extra experience. The solution is in knowing the solar system, and inputting commands by reverse order of some of the planets and the dwarf star in the solar system. Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter. It goes beyond moon logic into dwarf star logic. Repairing the plant also gives you the option to optimize it in further quests that are broken and give you a worse ending instead of a better one. And another quest is to share economic data from Gecko to Vault City in aim of a better alliance. Not to mention in the north of town, there's an engineer who has the part we need to get the car in the den working. Of course, there's another step though, and it involves another fetch quest for a person in Vault City. So onward we go. Vault City is hell disguised as heaven, like Florida. Clean, green, and civilized. They're an isolationist group of individuals who believe in their own supremacy over others because of a generational and circumstantial privilege, are willing to enslave people under a mildly changed title, hate non-standard or non-conforming humans on principle, and are a literal gated community. Holy shit, it is Florida. They even have the massive income disparity outside the gates, and the corrupt police violence against the impoverished and marginalized. Here you can meet another companion, resident old man John Cassidy, who runs a bar on the outside of town. He's got a heart condition, and despite being tied to Vault City for medical procedures, can for some reason join you and ditch the place. He's also quite prejudiced, maligning ghouls on sight, and is a bit of a dick about tribals, which you can confront him on seeing as you are one. There's a farmer here who needs a plow replaced, which you can buy from him as your good deed for the day. Actually getting into the main part of Vault City is a bit of a pain. You either have to acquire a visitor's day pass or prove yourself worthy of obtaining citizenship. They won't let you in until you dismiss your non-human allies either. The only thing citizenship is worthwhile for is not pissing off the guards when trying to enter the vault proper. You're not supposed to be allowed in unless you're a citizen, the operative phrase being supposed to be. In the city, you'll find many merchants, bars, and houses filled with people who want absolutely nothing to do with a filthy outsider, and most attempts to get information about the GEC or any kind of assistance for that matter are swiftly dismissed unless the person in question feels they can use us for something. In the maintenance building, Valerie's missing some needed tools. The pliers can be bought from a store in town, but the wrench is harder to come by. You either have to go well out of your way to another town like Reading and search every cabinet for it, it's in Morningstar Mine, or hope to God that you come across a caravan of ghouls between Vault City and Broken Hills. If you do get these things, which I didn't for a very long time, you can get a super toolkit, which is used to then get the fuel cell controller from Smitty and Gecko, which can then be used to repair the car in the den, which we can use the fuel cell regulator on and have a go-fast room machine. The requirements for actually getting the car to work are absurdly tedious, but the reward is very much worth it. The car moves through the world map way faster than walking and lowers the enemy encounter rate significantly. It really is a shame that I won't be getting it until near the end. Vault City's homes and stores have people in tattered clothing on the sidelines. These are the servants, which can be bought from a central depot of either acquired outsiders or law-breaking citizens. It's slavery, but they don't like it when you call it that. If it wouldn't get me kicked out of town permanently, the population of Vault City would have dropped substantially for this. There's a sheriff's office and incarceration center where you can talk to the sheriff. He'll send you to survey around Gecko, which I did very wearily, and to investigate the NCR settlement and report back. In the north of town is where the bureaucracy takes place. The leader of Vault City, Lynette, can be spoken to, and will talk down to you until and even after doing what she wants. She will not make us a citizen. 1, because she doesn't want to, and 2, because it's handed by taking a citizenship test that I tried and failed several times. I'm guessing it had to do with a suboptimal perception score, or they just didn't want me. The only person around here who's willing to see reason is senior council member McClure. We'll actually take in the economic data from the ghouls and Gecko and try to use it for both communities' benefit. Even though we're not really allowed into the vault itself, there is a doctor here that can help develop a cure for jet addiction, and you can get combat implants like subdermal armor. Plus, there's a red chip that'll be useful for raising strength much later. While I think my intention was to head to NCR to fulfill the next quest for Vault City's sheriff, I ended up passing a strange cave that was trapped to high hell. After several deaths, I crept my way to a raider encampment at the back of the cavern with enemies so strong that I'd die within seconds. Moving southward again, as if it never happened, I found a community known as Broken Hills. Another caravan departure point, but more importantly, a town that's striving for unity. The town itself is run by the super mutant Sheriff Marcus, resident nice guy and merry man. Going around town, you get the sense that there's an ideological divide between residents. It seems the majority are for the integration of all peoples into the town as long as they abide by the laws, but on occasion you'll get individuals who aren't quite so fond of sharing the space. The most pressing conflict in Broken Hills is to repair the mine's air purifier so that they may continue mining uranium to trade with other settlements. The problem is that the purifier is being held by a guy in New Reno, one that's pretty easy to get killed under certain circumstances. Luckily, we haven't met the guy yet, so we're in the clear. Broken Hills is also having a problem relating to missing persons, to which you'll find a pile of bodies hidden in the town's underground tunnel system. A note on one of the victims implicates Francis, the arm wrestling mutant, and Zaius, the head of the mine, in a conspiracy to kill mutant-hating townsfolk and pin the murders on another mutant hater named Jacob. We confront Zaius on this and are redirected towards Francis, of which we encourage them to leave town as recompense for his killings. Not sure that's a great sentencing choice, but hey, why not? We can also find a ghoul surrounded by flies who needs more power to his home to abate the pests from himself. He gets surrounded by flies because he sweats too much, and that on a ghoul I guess smells like a corpse, so the flies just flock to him. The power to his house is so that the AC can work properly. To actually get the power, we have to lay into another ghoul running the power station for being too lazy to move some knobs and levers. It's a nuclear-powered town, of course there's enough for one house's AC. At some point when wandering around, I came across a talking plant, who I uprooted to be closer to some other people since he was hard up for conversation. The plant taught me a trick to beat an intelligent rad scorpion at chess. Be warned, learning this trick pisses off the scorpion something fierce since you're basically cheating against it, and it'll try to attack you. You don't actually have to kill it, just leaving the area works fine. At this point, I left for New Reno to help fix the mine's air purifier. New Reno is a hellhole. Run by feuding crime families, the town is full of ways to lose your life, time, and money in the most asinine ways. Sex, drugs, gambling, and shootouts as far as the eye can see. On the bright side, there was some pocket change to be made in boxing matches, so I got the chance to test out my unarmed abilities. The fights were easy enough, especially when you kick the other fighter in the dick. They just keel over and you win. Otherwise, I want to get out of town as soon as possible, so I made my way to Renesco, the Rocket Man, burning off there at home. The guy's a snarky dealer, everyone's favorite, but he has the air purifier, so he must live. For now. I brushed past an alcoholic preacher before wandering to the other side of town, where the most measly crime family, the Wrights, lives. They barely have a foothold in town, don't push any drugs, besides booze, and Orville, the head of the family's wife, Ethel, pushes puritanical morals and abstinence from all drugs, including alcohol. The Wright family's main trouble is that one of their children is assumed to have been killed, despite evidence pointing to jet overdose being the cause of death. Neither conclusion is either right or wrong. There's a few ways to tackle the quest and some differing outcomes. The idea is to interview the local dealers to see if any of them pushed onto the right kid, but they all point towards each other. That inquiry usually leads to pinpointing Renesco, but if you get lazy and stop the investigation there, just reporting into Orville that it was Renesco that dealt him, Renesco will be killed. Now, while I don't hate that idea, especially because Renesco was the one that dealt to him, there is more to the puzzle here. The asking of dealers is mostly inconclusive, as they're not exactly forthright about their activities. So the only other actions are pushes in the direction of learning about the right kid by snooping around his room, and or by becoming a post-mortem toxicologist by digging up his corpse and finding it to show signs of being poisoned. Not jet poison, but by rad scorpion venom. This morbid process leads you to a graveyard south of New Reno where many developers are buried with a comical tagline, alongside Lenny's still living father who basically just goes, "Not now, son, daddy's busy with blackjack and hookers," and walks off. In the graveyard, you can dig up several useful items, but the most beneficial for us is the cool shades, which increase charisma when put into a weapon slot. We will be using this alongside Fallout Adderall to give us a larger band of merry men and mutants. Confronting Renesco about the poisoning reveals that the death of Orville's son was the result of an intentional poisoning ordered by the Salvatore family, of which, for reasons of politics, the Wrights can do nothing about. Telling Orville that his son was poisoned and that there's nothing he can do about it is the good resolution of the quest. It doesn't mean we can't take matters into our own hands, but we'll let the pot boil over a little longer for New Reno. After this quest, Orville can also ask you to look into the Sierra Army base to the north of town, but that's beyond our pay grade at the moment. The turrets outside that base rip myself and my companions to shreds in a single turn. Otherwise, I had my fill of the crime family's nonsense. They're all just in it for money and power. The Mordinos make all the jet. I have no idea what the Salvatores do, and the Bishops are just more of the same. Making my way back to Broken Hills, I found out that the air purifier has to be installed manually, so I huff gas and haul ass to fix it. For my troubles, I get a big gun which I'll never use, but more importantly, it frees Marcus from worries about the state of the town, so he's now willing to join us on our adventure. He's great, exceedingly well written, fun, and good in combat, being one of the only companions able to use heavy and energy weapons. He gets on well with Lenny too, which is great. The only way now to go is down. The New California Republic is a well-established and well-fortified community that carries itself better than just about any other settlement in the wasteland barring Vault City. The key difference between the two communities is that the NCR is far more expansionist than isolationist. They seek to incorporate nearby communities into their established order of a governed society akin to the pre-war United States, often regardless of whether or not communities really want to. They can force their hand pretty strongly, parallel to the expansionism and foreign policy of the United States, but they're not outright engaging in militant conflicts that we know of as of yet. We can receive a quest from the NCR Rangers to free slaves from an encampment outside of town, completing which nets you a neat pin. The town itself holds the best shot we have at finding a Gek. You know, the thing that our village needs to survive. You didn't forget, did you? The player's given an audience with the president of the NCR with relatively little fuss, and Tandy, now with a heavy southwestern accent, directs us towards Vault 15 to the west, where a group of individuals have set up an encampment and refuse to deal with members of the NCR. Our jobs are to try and convince them to secede to the NCR and to acquire computer parts from the vault, which we can do by saving one town member's daughter and then clearing out a band of cons that took residence within the vault. Speaking to Tandy is also a chance to hear about our progenitor, the Vault Dweller's escapades in the wasteland, and learn a little about the NCR. The NCR lore dump holodisc states that 700,000 people are all part of the NCR, which I find incredibly hard to believe. I doubt there are even that many people alive in the wasteland, let alone allied to one faction. Heading back to Tandy, she'll tell us about the location of Vault 13, the home of the Vault Dweller, which may have the Gek we're searching for. Heading there reveals a strange sight. Vault 13's original population has since left and has been replaced by Deathclaws. Unlike most, these Deathclaws are highly intelligent and surprisingly friendly. I wasn't expecting this at all, and very pleasantly surprised by this twist. The people of Vault 13 are quite happy with their situation, barring damage to the Vault's central computer, which we of course have the part to fix, so we do so, and are given the ever-elusive Gek for our troubles. This whole area is really great. I can't wait to come back later to see how everyone's doing. Before leaving the vault, we meet a robed individual who's willing to join us on our adventure to better learn of the various societies of the Waste. Our first combat encounter, and he immediately disrobes. Interesting choice. We have a Deathclaw for a companion. Goris is awesome. Can't really use weapons, but has great unarmed attacks and is all around a really interesting character. Only problem is that he has a bad tendency to leave the party at inconvenient times to initiate another quest. We're urged by Hakunin to return to Arroyo, but in my infinite wisdom, I procrastinate on the town's salvation to do other random stuff. I went back to New Reno to tip the scales of the town in a particular direction. After many attempts, New Reno was left with only one family. The Salvatores were destroyed, the Bishops were destroyed, the Mordinos were destroyed. In talking about the Mordinos, their quest line, or just wandering about with the title of boxing champion, can take you to a drug manufacturing plant barely north of New Reno, which houses the creator of Jad, Myron. He's a theoretical party member and a completely irredeemable human being. He is unfortunately the start of the quest to make a cure for jet addiction, so I have to talk to him. He's an arrogant, self-absorbed, manipulative drug manufacturer and sexual predator, so as soon as possible, he's just as much on the chopping block as the rest of New Reno. The only thing he's worthwhile for is giving our own character the opportunity to prove to him that endorphin blockers would nullify the effects of jet. He is technically superfluous, and I guess the party member of choice for evil characters. I find it really funny that New Reno is basically the good karma murder hobo hub. No karma losses for the crime family massacres. In fact, karma rises a lot for it, making the world a better place, one head trauma at a time. At this point, Goris kept trying to leave the group because he felt a sense of danger for his tribe, so we returned to Vault 13 to find the entire place completely bloodied with no traces of life left. A recording reveals that members of a group called the Enclave not only created the intelligent Deathclaws, but came to destroy them. In so doing, they also killed every other living being in Vault 13, Deathclaw or not, because that's just the kind of people the Enclave are. Gorse will still rejoin our party at this point, I assume emboldened by the desire to avenge his people, which, believe me, we will. It should also be noted that returning to Arroyo as Hakunin pleads reveals that the whole settlement was kidnapped by the Deathclaw killers, the Enclave, in case killing the sentient Deathclaws wasn't enough motivation to go after them. It was around this point, after getting some stuff done for a caravan from NCR to Redding, that I decided it was time to destroy the Wanamingos in the Redding mines. Being substantially more powerful and populous, it's a pretty easy victory, for which I'm able to get the excavator chip and deliver it to Cocoweef Mining Company. Following this, I'm finally a high enough level to be able to play sheriff in town. The town's actual sheriff has an injured leg and so asks for our assistance with some troubles around town. The tasks of a sheriff are many, and we have discretion in how they're solved. One quest involves finding out who assaulted one of the sex workers in town, to which I find the culprit and lock him up. Another requires you to get rent money or evict an old widow. I paid her rent for her. It's not like I didn't have thousands of dollars worth of arms money from the crime families I liquidated. The sheriffing culminates in taking on a troublesome gang leader whose brother's splinter gangs will subsequently hunt you down in random encounters following the completion of the quest. Good stuff. I went back to the den to deal with Metzger and the slavers, and subsequently forgot about Vic, who was trapped in there for over a year by the time I showed up. I like to think that he didn't realize the slavers were dead, so just stuck around in his cell forever. I went back to the Sierra military base after that, and slowly but surely disabled the turrets with substantial save scumming, and then used a howitzer shell to blow a hole in the base's front door. Exploring the base reveals a lot of pre-war experimentation on cell preservation, regrowth, as well as an active sentient AI called Skynet. If you're careful in how you explore the facility, you'll get various random bits that can be assembled into a nearby robogel, robot with brain, and have the AI transfer itself to the bot. What I find odd is that despite the awareness and general intelligence of the AI in its conversations with the player while exploring the base, once incorporated into the robogel, it's entirely limited by the brain that it's put in. There are 4 types of brains that can be put in the gel, the better of which can only be salvaged with an extremely high science skill. 100% is too low to get the best one. I ended up with a standard human brain and got out of it a robot companion that couldn't do very much. Its attacks were weak, it did not speak, it had no chance of being peak. I was striving to have the most interesting party members and felt like a sentient AI robot was a cooler choice than Old Man Heartnogood. After that, I bumbled my way towards the old military base from Fallout 1, the one that had the FEV vats in them, and was treated to the most asinine entrance puzzle known to man. Wrestling with unexplained UI and inventory mechanics, you have to grab a 2-pixel wide stick off a random spot in the ground, fix it to a minecart, activate timed dynamite in your inventory, hold the interaction cursor on the cart until it goes into the multiple function menu, well on a timer mind you, click the inventory satchel button, and then click the active dynamite from your inventory. Then interact with the stick on the minecart to push it into a rock wall that blows up, revealing the entrance. This interaction sucks. It's interesting in that it requires creative thinking, but it also requires knowledge of mechanics that aren't useful anywhere else in the game, and are never brought up before or after. The military base is admittedly optional, but I was desperate at this point to find a location, any location, that might have power armor. The amount of times I had to reload saves from deaths or was doing less than optimal damage for an unarmed build left me feeling unduly frustrated with much of my experience up to this point, and the process of getting the armor from the base was no different. Many deaths, and reloading time and time again for the same encounters ad nauseum, until I realized I could cheese the enemies by attacking, going through a loading zone, healing myself, and then attacking again. I still struggled, but eventually defeated the super mutants and a super duper mutant in the remains of the destroyed military base, and got myself a set of power armor for my troubles. This is where the astute realized that some of the content I'm listing is out of order based on the armor I'm wearing and the companions I have. Feel free to obsessively devote yourself to watching the video several times to find out. Realizing at this point I forgot to mention I got the car up and working, and it is such an unbelievable relief to have. Not to mention it has a unique theme when using it that rocks. Using the power of nuclear fission-based automobiles I make for San Francisco to immediately invalidate the power armor I spent hours reloading and fighting to get. In the big city, there's a Brotherhood of Steel member guarding a sanctuary who'll task you with getting some information on a vertibird, otherwise known as a helicopter, from an enclave base to the north called Navarro. This is a great opportunity for us to learn more about the faction that killed our Deathclaw friends, as well as sabotage and steal from the same faction. I got fed up and left RoboBrain by the Brotherhood base in San Francisco in anticipation of another cyborg NPC I knew was coming in Navarro. Goodbye AI, we hardly knew ye. For a military force with an interest in staying at least partially covert, the Enclave has next to no defenses in terms of its social engineering. They hide the base, sure, but a recruitment officer up front will just straight up let you in with almost no background check or anything, so long as you show up alone. We're immediately put to work by Sergeant Arch Dornan, who managed to yell his way deep into the Fallout fandom's subconscious for decades to come.
I am not a sir! I work for a living, you moron! You Sergeant or Sergeant Dornan. Do you understand me?
We're supposed to do guard duty, but we'll take the lax standards of the base as a prime opportunity to look around and grab anything not nailed to the walls. For the Brotherhood in San Francisco, we need to fetch some blueprints for the vertibirds, which we can get by worming our way into a spat between two engineers. Heading underground provides 4 points of interest. First is a doctor with a cyborg dog called K9. Very funny. The doctor performs all sorts of genetic experiments with complete disregard for ethics or morals. The man is so hated that even his dog disapproved of his work, for which their legs were disabled. After closing the door and killing the doctor, you're able to repair K9 with a part you find back on the surface of the base, and if, and only if, the doctor is dead, can you recruit K9 as a companion. Good dog. While we're here, we're also able to acquire Power Armor Mark II, completely invalidating the hours I spent trying to get the first set. It takes no work whatsoever to get the Mark II set. There's also a fob for the tanker we'll need from the base commander's room. To get it, we have to wait inconspicuously right in front of a guard and claim that we're cleaning staff. In power armor. From there, steal the fob and hope no one attacks. Lastly, the former doctor, now Stain, was putting to death one of the only remaining intelligent Deathclaws in a nearby chamber, so I set him free. You will be reprimanded by Dormand for leaving your post if caught, and if done so thrice, we'll set the entirety of the base to combat AI. Stay sneaky unless you enjoy odds against you. Back in San Francisco, the party begins again, less one robo-brain plus one robo-dog. San Francisco's most immediate conflict is one I am very well prepared for. 2 rival martial artists feud and battle in the town square. Dragon and Lo Pan, both of whom you can receive training from. The training in question is a multiple-stage gauntlet of hand-to-hand battles with no reprieve. It's the ultimate test of unarmed, and one which I succeeded at on 2 fronts. Lo Pan's school involved a lot of head-punching. Dragon's school involved fighting the reanimated bodies of fallen warriors. The warriors in question fell by my hand, but still. This bug made it a little difficult to get through the later parts of Dragon's bracket, since it was just me with no armor against multiple opponents, many of which would get up after dying. It's not the only time the enemies in the game broke either. In Vault 15, a con guard protecting the leader was killed in a corner, only to get up and go full ghost mode. They could be hit and damaged infinitely, their outline disconnected from the character's actual location, and they'd constantly get back up after being knocked down. Cool stuff. Anyway, the reason Dragon and Lo Pan are fighting is partially martial, but is also ideological in nature. Lo Pan is far more aggressive than Dragon and believes in a might makes right approach to operating the city. Since both fighters have garnered a following in their communities, following their conflict can give power to one particular faction. Both want each other dealt with a bonus for doing so with the Mighty Fist. I sided with Dragon for I agreed with his direction more than Lo Pan's. Lo Pan's followers are devastated following his loss. The more pervasive conflicts of powers in San Francisco is between the Shi, a group of residents and mostly scientists who are the descendants of a beached Chinese submarine following the nuclear explosions of 2077, and of the Hobologists, a cult. The more Fallout 2's quests go on, the more you realize that the decisions to be made therein are either to do the right thing or the very, very wrong thing, and that both work. The acting emperor of the Shi, Ken Lee, welcomes us to the city and needs our help in taking out the cult leader of the Hobologists. I may have gone a bit beyond just the leader. The vertibird plans we got from Navarro for the Brotherhood are also needed by the Shi, but there's no dilemma in regard to who needs it. Both can have it apparently. Helping out Ken Lee lets us meet the actual Emperor, which is a computer. A database with all the information we need on how to reach the actual Enclave base, as well as having the ability to direct a fuel supply to the ship we use to get there later. The Enclave base is on an oil rig in the middle of the ocean, by the way. I think I failed to mention that. It's the last remnant of the old United States, with it housing descendants of the political figures that escaped to the base right before the bomb struck the world, avoiding the worst of its impact. To get there, we need to wrestle the controls of a large vessel from the leader of the tanker vagrants. These guys are actually pretty nice, if not a little out of their depth. Chip asks you to get his spleen back. The quest itself is amusing, but requires an obnoxious amount of back and forth. The leader, Badger, will only trust you if you rescue his girlfriend from a group of creatures that have trapped her in the lower levels of the ship. One happy couple reunited, and we have what we need to make our way to the final stretch of the game. Word of advice: if you plan on doing post-game, leave your party members back at the docks of San Francisco before leaving. Trust. We get a cutscene of the boat taking off and we arrive at the Enclave oil rig. This is where it pays in droves to have our power armor. With no companions present and the armor on, all enemies are set to passive unless provoked. Otherwise, you'd have to try and kill your way through a gauntlet of insta-kill turrets and an army of heavily armored Enclave soldiers that'll melt you in mere seconds. As far as final areas go, the Enclave base is really great. It lets you explore, has multiple objectives that can be completed in a variety of ways, and lets you maintain either end of your character's moral binary while doing so. Well, here we meet the President of the United States. He reveals the Enclave's grand plan and why they've been such unrelenting pieces of shit throughout the game. The answer will not shock you. They believe themselves to be pure humans compared to those exposed to radiation in the centuries since the nuclear war, and have thus mutated, and have come to the conclusion that for the maintenance of the human race, these aberrations must be exterminated. To do so, they've created a concentrated form of the FEV virus to act as a swift killer for all in the wasteland, basically starting again with only the prime population of the Enclave. Both premise and conclusion are beyond reason, and so is the president. So we give him a gift of 8 super stim packs straight to the heart and watch him overdose. Now the actual plan. The president and the Enclave's idea of a pure humanity is blatantly eugenics and fascistic on its face. An ideal strand of humanity in the erasure of a population that fails to conform to the hypocritical standard they themselves impose leaves no room for themselves under their own premise. Firstly, they allow their members to traverse the wasteland, exposing themselves to the mutations that they claim to be exempt from. Second, human variation and the genetic adaptations made over long periods of time are a universal part of living beings. For the Enclave to not have at least some level of variation from their ancestors at the time of the nuclear war is impossible, especially given the far-reaching ramifications of post-apocalyptic levels of nuclear radiation. Third, they will break their own rules if it suits them, with a mutant under their own definition being the head of their combative forces. It's a thinly veiled excuse for a superiority complex and a desire for eugenics. In execution, the Enclave is just as brain-dead. They created a modified version of the very same virus that created mutants to kill people, made sure it was able to be inoculated to preserve themselves, and then never did get around to actually giving their own population the vaccines. Mind-blowing. I think the limited genetic pool in the Enclave is finally showing its effects. The best defense mechanism the Enclave has is a door puzzle that's more frustrating than engaging, and leans far too heavily into brute forcing the answer. It's one of those multi-switch puzzles where hitting one in one place opens and closes a few different doors in others. You have to make your way to the endpoint by opening and closing said doors in the right order. Monkeys and a typewriter and all that, but instead of Shakespeare's entire works, they just have to type the name Shakespeare. Yippee, you did it. After the president's untimely death, all that's left is to find a way to get our people out and ensure that the Enclave can never succeed in their goals. Luckily, most of their population is in one conveniently isolated base with a nuclear reactor. First though, there's a scientist on another floor who is willing to actually listen to reason. Telling him about the natural course of evolution and the constancy of change allows him to see the errors in the Enclave's dogma and inspires him to reroute the FEV and its vaccine to the appropriate places in the facility. He vaccinates himself and our tribe, and then pumps the FEV gas to the rest of the facility. Everyone not inoculated or wearing power armor dies. Unfortunately, that still leaves a lot of people in power armor. Fortunately, exploding the reactor's control panel will be enough to deal with that, and give us a convenient 10 minutes to get out afterwards. Right at the exit, we encounter the big bad, the man, the myth, the legend, who I've yet to name throughout this whole thing. Frank Horrigan. He's a fucking massive unit of a mutant who runs the show for the Enclave's military and is responsible for all of the major massacres and misdeeds that haven't been by our own hand. He'll tear through anything and take just about anything, except for a room full of turrets, several gunmen, and a couple punches in the head. He gets severed in twain and still tries to talk like he's won. He claims he set the reactor's self-destruct sequence. I hate to break it to you, but I'm already a step ahead on that one. He dies mid-sentence. We manage to flee by boat before the reactor melts down completely and watch as it explodes from a distance. The ending gets straight into it, and is the same slideshow fare from the first game, but this time around, things went considerably better for the Wasteland. Arroyo and Vault 13 managed to become a well-built community thanks to our acquiring of the GEC, and our Elder managed to pass away peacefully after a time. For my last-minute work between MODOK and the Slags, the underground people in the town managed to become a successful agrarian society of its own. With the slavers gone, the den becomes a more peaceful place, as peaceful as a casino town can get anyway. Vault City slowly managed to destroy itself, for which I'm very pleased. I left the Rights in control of New Reno by process of elimination. Apparently they can actually make the town a decent place if you don't complete the Sierra Army base quest, but I did, so instead they have a very short violent takeover with rocket launchers. Yeah, I imagine it was short, there was no one to fight. Gecko and Vault City, for the remainder of the latter's existence, formed truce to trade power for medical supplies. There's a bugged ending for Gecko where they can form a much stronger alliance with Vault City, presumably helping to alleviate the strong prejudices and oppression that occurs in VC. It's impossible to get, and trying to do so nets you the bad ending for Gecko where the ghouls are enslaved by members of Vault City. The catalyst for this is optimizing the power plant, of all things. No good deed, I guess. Harold and his tree move onwards. Redding becomes part of the NCR due to Cocoweave's Labarge being given the excavator chip, becoming mayor, and leveraging her political power. Broken Hills peacefully disperses after the uranium mine dries up, but in its existence, we manage to broker peace between the mutant, ghoul, and human populace. Marcus didn't show up in my ending, because I brought him with me to the oil rig, and then dismissed him alongside all my other companions before going in the front door. This, by the game's counting, means that they all stayed there when the reactor went off, dying. Oops. Marcus would have gone east had he lived. The NCR expands, incorporating nearby communities such as Vault 15, setting up a plot thread for a game that wouldn't be made for another 13 years. Unfortunately, Vault 13 and its death clause died, and there's basically no way to avoid this ending. The She in San Francisco continued as a successful society, and made a plant that could grow in the irradiated wastes, which is cool. And lastly, the vagrants of the Valdez, the ship we commandeered, dispersed in time. We're left with an overall positive impression of our actions in the wasteland, because we chose to be a decent human, and because we were given the time to do so. Except we really weren't. The game still institutes time limits, but nowhere near as harshly as the first game. The massacre of the Death Claws at Vault 13 is technically preventable if you manage to destroy the Canine's former owner before getting the Gek, but the ending will always say it happens due to a scripting error. Also, you can lose the game if you take... how long? 13 years. Okay. Guess Arroyo's problems weren't that bad after all. I appreciate the method used to give differentiation to endings of Fallout. By keeping ending cinematics minimal, relegating them to a slideshow, it allows for much more variety in the ways that a player's story can conclude, and takes into account their actions throughout the entirety of their adventure. Even in its flawed form, where certain endings are impossible due to scripting errors, the amount of contingencies on display for every major community and faction is extremely commendable, and is rewarding for actions to have weight within the context of the game's narrative. It's somewhat unfortunate to know that these choices can be mildly invalidated by the concept of canon events as sequels are created, but that's a limitation of sequential narratives across media franchises rather than a flaw of the game in isolation. As a standalone story, and as a game, I think Fallout 2 does a really good job of facilitating player choice in a largely linear narrative, and the adventures therein are well worth experiencing, even if it doesn't iterate very much upon the formula established by its predecessor. The creator of Fallout, Tim Cain, would leave Interplay partway through development with lead artists Jason Anderson and Leonard Boyarsky to found their own game studio, Troika Games. This departure was the result of worsening conditions on development following the release of the first game, wherein Cain would be forced to assume worse hours, more project responsibilities, be undermined on the project for creative decisions like the outsourcing of the game's box art, and for decreased pay in the form of bonuses for project staff, in spite of the performance of the original release. While these developers would go on to create some exceptional works in their own right, such as Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura, and Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines during their time at Troika, the departure of the CRPG trifecta left development in the hands of those who remained at Interplay for a time, though many of the developers would be poached by Troika in later years in a fitting act of corporate revenge. Lead programming was handed from Cain to Jesse Reynolds. Lead artists were shifted from Anderson and Boyarsky to Gary Platner, who went on to work extensively on the environmental design for World of Warcraft, and to Tremel Ray Isaac, notable for their future work on Neverwinter Nights 2 as lead artist. Scott Rodenheiser is of course still here as well, making those 3D heads we know and love. Lead design roles were assigned to Fargus Urquhart and Matthew J. Norton, the former of which would become the CEO of Obsidian Entertainment and producer or division director on just about every beloved CRPG between 1997 to present. Seriously, Fallout, Fallout 2, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Icewind Dale, Neverwinter Nights 1 and 2, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, Fallout New Vegas, Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, Tyranny, The Outer Worlds. Where there's a CRPG, he's got his fingers on it. Notably, his sub-designers in the credits are Chris Avallone, who worked on just about every good CRPG in existence and is the main reason that Planescape Torment and New Vegas' writing is as good as it is, and David Cook, the lead designer of Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition and the creator of fucking Planescape. Also present was Colin McComb, who on top of doing extensive work for the Planescape setting as well as other D&D modules, was the lead writer on Torment Tides of Numeria. We found the CRPG rabbit hole. All that is and will ever be exists here. Charles Deenan once again spearheaded the audio for Fallout 2, and did a great job just like in the first game, and Mark Morgan's soundtrack remains an excellent piece both in the context of the game and on its own merits. The vocal performances around the board are spectacular, featuring the voices of Charlie Adler, Cree Summer, Tress McNeil, Greg Eagle, Flo DeRay, Dwight Schultz, and of course, Michael Dorn as everyone's favorite merry man and mutant. Every developer deserves recognition for their hard work on this project, and in many cases their ongoing portfolios of work on successful and high-quality projects. It's a fascinating process to see how a person's philosophy on art and design changes over time, so I implore those even partially interested to read credits on works they've enjoyed and find the trends envisioned between members of staff across projects. Fallout 2 was pretty well anticipated given the success of the first entry, and was reviewed favorably at the time. Reviews of the era praised the game for the depth of its systems and unique quest design, while warning of the mature content, though some would raise the critique that the game was remarkably and fundamentally similar to its predecessor. Across these reviews were the near universal lamentations of the game's technical instability at launch, and even in the face of relatively swift patches in '98, issues persisted. Interestingly, however, critics of the era were pleased with the lack of fundamental changes to Fallout 2 over its predecessor. Many critics wrote of an if-it-ain't-broke approach to design that perhaps reflected the desire of the time for simply having more Fallout to play. I don't wholly agree with this sentiment, finding myself somewhat dissatisfied with the lack of quality of life improvements in the game, but can understand the perspective nonetheless. General reception of the game remains quite favorable, being among the best reviewed entries in the series overall. Fans and critics are quick to praise the game's strength and the quality of craft on display. Despite the classic Fallout games not being as popularly played en masse, the community that surrounds them is still quite active, with continued modding efforts, reviews, discussions, lore videos, fan art, and so on. Fallout 2 was and remains a positively received game to the general public. Following the release of Fallout 2, Interplay's handling of the property was middling. The development of future releases under the publisher would both see fairly substantial changes to core formulae, with Fallout Tactics being a mission-based real-time strategy game, and Fallout Brotherhood of Steel being a console-exclusive cash-in on the success of Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, adapting the same engine and formula to retrofit their interpretation of the Fallout aesthetic. Neither game is particularly bad, apparently, but the property fell into lesser prominence in the time of those two games. There were developmental prototypes for Fallout 3 that have since been documented by the community, most popular being the project title Van Buren, but this never saw the light of day. In 2004, Bethesda was able to attain the license to develop Fallout 3, and in 2007 acquired the property from Interplay outright, to this day still holding the property rights. In 2008, Fallout 3 was released, breathing life back into the stagnated franchise with an entry that even Tim Cain praises as revitalizing the IP. Fan opinions remain contentious on the series post-Bethesda. Some very much enjoy the games generally, while a subset of the community remains steadfast that Bethesda lost the vision of the property, has taken too many liberties, and that the quality of the games have been on a downward trend. General user reviews of the future Fallout games reflect this sentiment, as while major outlets were mostly favorable to the games, 76 notwithstanding, fan opinions don't necessarily uphold the same general positivity. Much of this comes down to the shift from classic RPG to action RPG shooter, to mostly looter shooter with RPG elements, the oversimplification of gameplay, and a reduction in seemingly meaningful player choices and writing as the games went on. New Vegas is an exception, as initial reception of the game by major outlets was relatively favorable, but fan reception of the game parallels the reverence towards the original two releases. It's led to a divisive community in Fallout that has a tendency to separate itself as Eastern and Western Fallout, named as such for the games taking place in the Western United States include the original two games in New Vegas, of which all share fundamental staff members and development philosophies born from Cain's vision, and for the games in the Eastern United States spearheaded by Bethesda and slowly departing from the CRPG roots of the series. I, for one, have accidentally fallen into the Western category for only having played 1, 2, and New Vegas, and for having the predisposition to assume that Bethesda-designed Fallout games share similar problems I have with the simplification of the Elder Scrolls series over time. Admittedly, it is a bias, but I'm pretty sure I'd moderately enjoy Fallout 3, be bored or annoyed by Fallout 4, and am unlikely to ever touch Fallout 76 for this reason. In any event, the Fallout series is at least still successful, and in many ways still holds most of the vision of the original games, but as you know, New Vegas is still better. Bite me.